What makes the MCU good? What ignited the flame that literally set the entire world on fire and led to millions of fans who weren't even familiar with comic books to become die-hard lovers of all these characters that the Marvel Cinematic Universe introduced to us? What made your typical jock high school kid go and see an actual superhero movie? Something that back before the advent of the MCU was completely unheard of. Watching superhero movies was not a cool thing that the average non-nerdy geeky person attended on a regular basis. And back before the tragedy that was Phase 4, Marvel was pumping out hit after hit and everyone was watching them. They had a huge audience. Obviously, before the MCU, there were exceptions, right? There was Batman 1989 and there were some hits, Spider-Man, but there wasn't a cinematic universe that regularly brought normal people who normally wouldn't be interested in superhero movies back 2-3 times a year to catch up with the superheroes in the Marvel universe. So the MCU clearly had some kind of magic that was drawing people in from far and wide, all across America and all across the world. But what was it, and how was that lost during Phase 4? Because that whole thing where everyone loves to go see Marvel movies, that's not happening anymore. That sort of hype, that's all kind of died down. We see little rebirths of it with big movies like No Way Home and now this Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but it's not a regular thing anymore the way it was pre-Endgame. So, how did that all go away, and what originally made the MCU tick? Well, in my opinion, it was a mixture of a well-tested formula that was somewhat predictable and good creative visions from directors that were brought on by the genius behind it all, Kevin Feige. It wasn't anything groundbreaking and it wasn't anything really too out there. It was sort of just a mixture of big, cool action spectacle, we'd all seen that before, and fun, charismatic actors who made you laugh in the process. And of course, there were different tropes that the stories hung on, like the mentor figure dying, like the way in which they got their powers, all the villains just being opposite versions of themselves, all those kinds of things that we know work. They do get a little old after a while, but they're good ways to make sure that the stories hit all the right emotional beats for the audience. And the nice thing about that side of the MCU was there was a healthy balance between the corporate executives who wanted to make sure the movies made money and they could appeal to the broadest possible audience. So there wasn't anything weird or pretentious when it came to the creative stuff the director was trying to do, but also the studio executives didn't have their boot on the necks of the directors, not letting them do anything and just pumping out lifeless cash grabs for the masses to consume. You felt like you were getting a healthy dose of both, which is a problem that Hollywood struggles with. You either lean way towards one side or way towards the other side. And even though a lot of those MCU movies felt a little formulaic at times, sometimes they were great, they still knew how to balance that with the creative vision of the director most of the time. There were very few flops, and even if a movie wasn't that great, it was interspersed with a whole bunch of other exciting movies that people just sort of overlooked the Thor the Dark Worlds that Marvel released. So for the most part, that creative and corporate balance was managed pretty nicely, and we got a lot of really good movies. Stuff that's forever gonna be in the classics of superhero films. You know, you got your first Avengers movie, obviously the first Iron Man movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, the second Captain America movie, Captain America Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, all that kind of stuff. But literally nothing in Phase 4 will ever be considered a classic by anybody. It's like seeing your favorite rock star from like the 80s try to perform one of their hits today. It just doesn't work as well. They don't have that big belty voice anymore because they're 70. But in the MCU's case, it's even worse, because with the rock stars, they just don't have the capability to be a cool rock star anymore. The MCU still has the resources to be able to make awesome, epic event movies that would be considered classics if they did it right, but they're not. And that's partially, of course, the creative team's fault, but also you have the Disney and corporate side. It's some of their fault too. For example, Disney Plus is wanting to sort of amp up their streaming game, right? So they can compete with Netflix and Hulu and all these other big streaming giants who are trying to take away their business. So they're forcing Kevin Feige to make a lot more movies and shows, which is sort of diluting the quality across all this new stuff that he's having to make. He couldn't focus on making Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania a good, consistent movie that didn't feel like it was all shot in one room with a green screen around it and written by ChatGPT, because he was focused on coming up with good creative ideas for the Marvels, for Hawkeye, for all those other streaming shows and all the other movies movies that he now has to make. The greedy corporate executives came in and they were like, okay, we have to make more money in this area, so let's just up the creative output in the Marvel area. But that's not how creativity works, okay? To some extent, creativity can be corporatized and can be turned into a business, but only so far. That can only be taken so far. Eventually, you start ruining the quality of your products because you're treating them as commodities rather than visions and stuff that has to be tinkered with so that they can express sort of a feeling to the audience. And when you have these greedy suits with dollar sign eyes just trying to pull in more money for the company, Kevin Feige isn't given an environment and a space to be able to do his work effectively. And we've seen that play out very clearly, because everything in Phase 4 and now Phase 5 a little bit, all the quality in all those projects has dropped significantly. Everyone has noticed it. Everyone's saying, oh, the MCU is dead now. And that might be true, but there can still be a revival. All you need is a couple good movies in a row, and people might turn their head back towards Marvel and be like, oh, are you going to keep doing this? Because if you do, then I'll come back. But as long as these executives keep putting this boot on Kevin Feige's neck, he's not going to be able to make any good movies. Let me know your opinion on that down in the comments below. Do you think I'm off on that? Or do you think, oh yeah, that makes completely perfect sense. Now I understand why Marvel's movies haven't been good lately. And then you've got the creative, introspective, self-indulgent director side of things, where the creative process sort of goes a little too far in one direction too, and the movies might not appeal to as broad of an audience. For example, Eternals. It was terrible. That was an awful movie. I'm not trying to bash anyone in the movie. I don't have anything against anyone in the movie, but the movie was awful. The quality of the film was not at all on the level of anything that Marvel has done. And that's not because there was a corporate interference with that movie. The problem with Eternals was that too much creative freedom was given to a director who was clearly not qualified and didn't have the experience to direct a big blockbuster type movie. Maybe she'll get better at that in the future, but clearly she had too much freedom to do what she wanted in that movie, and it came off as too weird. It was boring, and it told its story in a way that it thought was clever, but really it was just incompetence. Another example for me would be Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I know a lot of you liked that movie, but it really just wasn't for me. I loved the first Black Panther, right? Because that was back in the era where Marvel was doing things correctly, and you felt that the director was really telling the story that he wanted to, and also Marvel sort of had him restrained and kept him in the mold that he needed to be in. And that combination led to a great movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. But this one, I think the reins were sort of let off of him a little more, maybe because Kevin Feige was busy with way too much other stuff, and he sort of went too far. There wasn't enough excitement in the movie. Sure, he didn't become Black Panther until literally the final battle. I liked the homage for T'Challa, but I really didn't enjoy the film as a whole. I had the same problem with Doctor Strange Mom. So in my opinion, all three of those movies failed because they had too much creative freedom, and then the rest of the MCU movies failed because there was too much corporate interference with the whole trying to make a bunch of Disney Plus shows type thing. And Marvel has lost that balance. So let me know what you thought down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And if you like the stuff you see on this channel, make sure to subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you back next time I upload.